So now we're moving into the top 10, and we're going to stick with Star Trek and with one of the more prolific composers of science fiction soundtracks, and that is James Horner and his soundtrack for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. There's a lot of great musical stings in here. My favorite, though, is from the Battle of the Mutara Nebula. I love that musical composition combination of, you have that sort of runaway Khan theme where he's attacking the Enterprise, and then you have the Enterprise firing back in the triumphant Federation theme. Star Trek II is probably the only Star Trek movie that really transcends fandom. Most of the Star Trek movies are good. Some of them are very good. Star Trek II is the best, and it is the one that even people who are casual fans or not fans at all really love. You have a great villain in Ricardo Montalban. You have great directing. It really, Star Trek 1, I have a higher opinion of than most people do, but it kind of was a disappointment for a lot of people. It made tons of money though. But Star Trek 2 to a lot of people is what sort of put the franchise back on track to being, Horatio Hornblower in space. And James Horner's soundtrack is a big reason for that. It is a very naval feel to it, with the way it has these long sweeping orchestral pieces, and then the final battle, of course, is fantastic. Horner has composed a number of ones. A lot were vying for attention here, including Batteries Not Included, which is a very good soundtrack. Apollo 13, which is one of my favorite movies ever and has a great soundtrack, and Aliens, of course, I've done on this channel and has another amazing soundtrack. And so number 10, as we creep into the top 10, James Horner's Star Trek II soundtrack. So number 9, I will admit, is probably something most people would not rate in their top 10. I like it because of the sense of scale and the way it got me into this franchise. And so I will be the first to admit most people where I wouldn't put this where, but I'm going to go with Toto's soundtrack for the 1984 Dune. There are a lot of leitmotifs in this movie that I think work out quite well, and I think the soundtrack is good and not something I would have expected from Toto, to be frank. I mean, I bless the rains down in Africa, but I don't expect them to do a desert movie. The 1984 Dune, I have a higher opinion of than most people, especially the director's cut, which Lynch disowned, but I actually think is superior. Especially the intro to that, which I've sent that to people who were confused by the Dune remake about what exactly the political situation is, because I think that explains it really well. So, number 9, Toto's soundtrack to Dune. So, number 8, Vangelis's 1982 score for Blade Runner. It's got a very ambient sound feel to it, where it has a sort of industrial sound. It almost sounds like the iconic visuals are creating this sound by themselves in some parts. I mean, you do have right here this sort of overlapping soaring theme and so forth, but most of the movie, it has that sound that it's perfectly fits the visuals, where it sounds like the sound is making the visuals and the visuals are making the sound. I don't know if I've expressed that very well. Blade Runner is another movie where the visuals and the sound are just so good. And then you layer on that a good story and great acting, and you've got one of the best science fiction movies ever. So number 8, Vangelis's wonderful score for Blade Runner. Number 7, probably going to be a little controversial that I rated him this low. When I talk about maximalist minimalism, or minimalist maximism, or maximal minimalism, or minimalism, this is who I'm talking about, the leader of that pack, and that is Hans Zimmer. I went back and forth through a half a dozen scores with him. He's mostly been associated with Chris Nolan. His Interstellar soundtrack was on this list when I originally composed it, but now that we have the full two-parter, I'm going to move ahead and say Dune is number one, is his top soundtrack. With Zimmer, you really can hear that of this isn't so much a melody as sections and fragments of music repeated, changing pitch, combination, tenor to create more of a mood than a song. And he does this so well in Dune with so many different sounds for the Bene Gesserit, for the Fremen, for the Atreides, for the Harkonnens, for the Emperor. This was a labor of love. Zimmer wanted to do this soundtrack very badly. Overall, I mean, this is a soundtrack I listen to a lot, and my daughter listens to it a lot too. She really loves it. So probably could have put this higher, but there's a lot of really great soundtracks coming up. So number 7, we're going to go with Hans Zimmer, Dune. So number 6 is, and again, going to be something a little bit more obscure, and that is Gottfried Hubert's soundtrack from Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Metropolis is a 1927 silent film that really set the tone for science fiction for the last century. Every science fiction movie that has come along can trace some of its roots in terms of visuals and storytelling and music to Metropolis, because it broke the mold. It set what movies could do. If you have not seen this, and silent movies don't bother you, especially a really long one, I do recommend it. It is really an amazing movie. When I first saw this in the mid-1980s, the movie was 80 minutes long and had a soundtrack that had lots of pop stars, like I think Joan Jett and Adam Ant and Pat Benatar and a few others. And that was the soundtrack. And then 20 years later, they found Hubert's original score, and they found tons of missing footage, and now it is 148 minutes, just a little short of what Fritz Lang's original cut was, and incorporates the soundtrack that was written specifically for the movie. And it is a great soundtrack. I mean, you can definitely feel the Wagnerian influence on a 1920s German composer, but you can also see, looking ahead, to more of a Stravinsky tone, more of the kind of modern music we have now. And it really bridges that gap. This is from the scene where the hero encounters the machines that are in the underworld of Metropolis that keep the energy running for the overworld where the rich and powerful live. All due respect to Adam Ant, this is so much better. For a silent movie, the soundtrack is even more important than it is for a talkie. When I saw Metropolis the first time, I was impressed. When I saw it the second time with this soundtrack, with all the restored footage, I was overwhelmed. And so I can't leave this off of the list. So number 6, Gottfried Hubert's wonderful soundtrack, and for a long time, for almost 80 years, lost soundtrack for Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Number 5, probably going to be a little bit of dispute over this, and that is Daft Punk's pulsing minimalistic score for Tron Legacy. Again, those repeated measures. Dun, 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 dun. Same leitmotif, just at different pitches. And building up to something really powerful. That's from the Adagio for Tron. I have mixed feelings about Tron Legacy. Again, the visuals are very good. Parts of the plot are okay. The music is absolutely fantastic. That's the best part of the movie, in my opinion. That movie would have benefited a lot from like 1,000,000% more Bruce Boxleitner. We only got a couple scenes with Tron, and his one line, "I fight for the users." I was like, oh, he's back, and then he dies, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. That movie had way too little Bruce Boxleitner. That's all I'm saying about that movie. But that soundtrack is fantastic. So number 5, Daft Punk's Tron Legacy. Number 4 is from another very prolific and very talented music composer. He's done, let's see, I think the original Alien, Poltergeist, Patton, a few other things. This is from what I think is his best soundtrack. What this is most famous for is the theme. He did not use the original Star Trek theme of Alexander Courage, but composed a completely new theme. And that theme would be repeated in Star Trek V, unfortunately, which also has a great soundtrack, actually. That's probably the best part of the movie is Jerry Goldsmith did it again, and it was another great soundtrack. But also would come back in Star Trek The Next Generation and become iconic with the new generation of Star Trek. There's so many great themes in this. The flyover of Voyager, this battle with the Klingons, the introductory theme, the tour of the Enterprise, all really wonderful musical cues. But my favorite is the Ilea theme. Again, I wish I could play the whole thing for you, but the copyright bots will be all over me. That is just an incredible romantic theme. Really sells the romance between Ilea and Decker in a way that the script really kind of doesn't. Star Trek was another one where I have kind of an iconoclastic view. Most people I know don't care for it. I really love the movie. And a big reason, Jerry Goldsmith's amazing soundtrack. So number 4, Star Trek 1, Jerry Goldsmith. Number 3 is another minimalistic soundtrack, again from an unexpected source. That is Junkie XL's amazing soundtrack for Mad Max Fury Road. I've done a video on Mad Max Fury Road. To me, Fury Road is one of the best movies of the 2010s and maybe in competition for the best. Everything about this movie is great. The visuals are, of course, fantastic. The acting is great. The story is great. Everything about that movie works. I'm running out of adjectives here to describe it. But one of the things that sort of binds it all together is Junkie XL's score. And this is my favorite part of the score, Brothers in Arms, for when Furios and Max begin fighting on the same side against the bikers. Again, hear that minimalism? Just repeated fragments. Now you add the strings above. Now they're going to add something above it. But keep that ostinato going. The whole soundtrack is great. This is one, I have to be careful. This can't come on when I'm in the car or I will start speeding because I'll get so revved up for this. So this is just one of the best soundtracks of the 2010s. One of the best science fiction soundtracks of all time. Number 3 on our list, Junkie XL's Mad Max Fury Road. Number 2 is from a movie I have also done on this channel as being one of the most scientifically inaccurate movies ever made, and that is The Black Hole. But John Barry's soundtrack, another prolific movie composer, had his best work with a science fiction film, and that is his soundtrack for The Black Hole. It just sounds like a black hole. It just sounds like stuff swirling into the black hole. I've been known to play that soundtrack as students come into the classroom when I'm going to give my lecture on black holes. And I tell them this is one of the most scientifically inaccurate movies made, but it has an absolutely fantastic soundtrack, especially the last 10 minutes of the movie when they go through the black hole. There's no dialogue, basically, and it's all Barry's score, and he just knocks it absolutely out of the park. When I was a kid, we were taken to this because it was a Disney movie. They figured it'd be a Disney movie. You could take kids to see a Disney movie. And it absolutely traumatized me, the scene with Maximilian and Professor Reinhardt merging and the visions of hell and all this stuff. I don't think my parents quite expected that. But one of the reasons that it had such an impact on me as a kid was because of John Barry's soundtrack. So kind of mediocre movie, but the soundtrack is just amazing and one of the best soundtracks I think ever made, and that is John Barry's Black Hole. So before we get to number one, I did want to take a little bit of a diversion to talk about TV series. When I composed this list initially, I had TV series and movies mixed up, and I wasn't very happy with it because a TV series is a very different animal from a movie. First of all, you have way more music you have to compose for a TV series than for, say, a 2-hour movie. But also, it serves a different purpose. With a movie, it has to be more dramatic and bigger and lift up the action and so forth. Where with a TV series, you're often just more setting tone and sort of enhancing the storytelling, and it serves a more subtle purpose typically than it does in a movie. And so what I decided eventually to do was to put all the movies together and then just have some honorable mentions for TV series that have had great soundtracks. I've already mentioned Ludwig Göransson's great work for The Mandalorian, so I won't mention it again, except just now when I mentioned it again. And I have also mentioned Alexander Courage's Star Trek work, but there are 5 series I focused on that had really amazing soundtracks. One of those is, of course, my favorite series of all time, Doctor Who. And that is the Murray Gold era when he was composing the incidental music for the TV show. During the Davies and Moffat eras, Doctor Who was not a subtle show. And the music was not subtle. It hit hard. It punched up the big moments like rescuing Earth or Rose taking over the space-time continuum, or would break your heart when, with the parting of the ways and things like that. I have those soundtracks, again, on my playlist that I listen to every now and then, and some of the songs in there are just really, really good. Like everything else, it ended when Chris Chibnall took over the show and somebody else was doing the incidental music, and it just wasn't nearly as good. I think Murray Gold is back now that Russell T Davies is back in control, so we'll see how that goes. But Murray Gold's Doctor Who work, that's been amazing. Another one was the Babylon 5, another one of my favorite series. Chris Franke from the group Tangerine Dream, not someone you would have expected to be able to do great work, but Babylon 5, one of the many, many charms of that series is the music that was composed. Joe Straczynski has talked about this many times in interviews and in commentary tracks about how he could say to Franke, all right, I just want you to just break my heart. And Franke would absolutely do it. And it's one of those series. I've watched Babylon 5 now several times. I'm a evangelist for Babylon 5. I try to get my students to watch it. But it is a great show, and that's part of the reason is the music. Another one you wouldn't expect, but the X-Files. Yes, it is a science fiction show sometimes. And Mark Snow's work with that. Not only the theme song, which was apparently composed by accident, but the incidental music that he worked on for the entire show, for the bulk of the show's great years when it was really good. The first 6 seasons of the X-Files are absolutely excellent. And one of the reasons is because you have the cinematography and the filming and the directing and the writing and the music all in sync to create this mood of paranoia or horror or wonder or confusion or whatever it is they're looking for. His music was always perfect for the moment. And so that was one of the reasons why The X-Files for a while was the best show on television. Another one of my favorite shows, Firefly. Not only do you have the Ballad of Serenity composed by Joss Whedon, but Greg Edmondson's incidental music combining Western and science fiction elements like the show did worked really well. There were lots of little leitmotifs within the show and really got the show to where it needed to be in terms of being both funny and serious and dramatic and interesting. And so I think that was a big part of the reason why the show was as good as it was. And finally, music from a show I have not watched, but has been recommended to me. And I actually have listened to it quite a bit. And that is Greg McCreary's great music for the Apple TV Plus's Foundation series. I have not watched it because I'm leery of it. I'm a big Asimov fan. His books are right over there. And I've been told by people who have watched it that as long as you forget that you read the books, the show is actually pretty good. I will watch it at some point and let you know what I think. But the music is fantastic. And that's a soundtrack that I've also started listening to a lot lately because it is very good and makes me hopeful that the series will be up to the music. So those are my 5 TV series. Now back to number 1. although the title card for this says no Star Wars, look, I'm about to say a Star Wars movie, and you're like, oh, like we never heard of Star Wars. But you can't not put Star Wars #1. It is not only one of the great soundtracks, it is the most iconic and from probably the greatest composer in American history. A composer who I think will be remembered with Brahms and Stravinsky and Wagner. And yeah, I know what I'm saying. And when you're talking about Star Wars, you're not just talking about one movie, you're talking about 9 movies. 9 movies that tell a musical story with leitmotifs that fans can recognize from a few bars. In an episode of The Mandalorian, they mention Yoda, and it plays just a couple bars of the Yoda theme.
I've only known one other being like this. A wise Jedi Master named Yoda.
And all the fans sort of twittered a little bit because it brings out this emotion of when we first saw Yoda and so forth. He has these leitmotifs for Leia and Rey and Anakin and whoever, Darth Vader, that are so iconic. And what other movie is like that? What other movie has 9 scores that have themes that go from the first movie to the 9th movie all the way through, and that you can just hear a little bit of and know what it is? You know, Williams has composed the most iconic scores, not just for science fiction, but outside of science fiction. There's a concert where he's performing music and the cello just plays none, none, none. And the audience all laugh because they know it's the Jaws theme coming up. Schindler's List and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Catch Me If You Can, very different. And just within science fiction, you could argue in this space for E.T. or Close Encounters of the Third Kind or a couple other movies he's done amazing soundtracks for. But Star Wars stands alone with 9 movies and hours of music with themes ranging all the way from the wonderful, whatever you thought of the prequels, and I have a better feeling of them than most do. Duel of the Fates. Everyone loves Duel of the Fates. It's amazing music. Across the Stars, the Anakin Padme love theme. Whatever you thought of their romance, and I thought it was a little forced, that theme is just amazing. Just you can't not be moved by it. And then in the Scherzo for X-Wings, Rey's theme, The Emperor's March. I remember when we saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater and my mother came home. This is the kind of pianist she was. She started playing the Imperial March on the piano. Had to experiment to get it a little bit to get it right, but eventually was playing it because as a lifelong musician, it hit her on that level of, I want to play this. This is so amazing. And what other composer is there? What other franchise is there that elicits that kind of depth that goes into people's souls like that? There isn't. Now, you could take Star Wars. That might be your pick. I'm actually going to go with Revenge of the Sith as the best soundtrack because Revenge of the Sith has the most narrative heft of any of the Star Wars movies. Maybe you could say Empire, you could make an argument for that, since that really set the tone of what the dark side was, and that this was a more complex story than we'd been led to believe, and so forth. But Revenge of the Sith has a job, and mostly does it well, in my opinion, I know a lot of people disagree with me, of getting from the fall of the Republic to the rise of the Empire, and the fall of Anakin Skywalker, and the destruction of the Jedi. And that's a powerful story. And the only reason it works, I think, is because of John Williams' score, which does almost all of the emotional heavy lifting in that. You could almost watch Revenge of the Sith as a silent movie with John Williams' score and enjoy it as much as you can with the dialogue. That might be more of an insult to the dialogue than a praise of Williams, but you get my point. Especially, I think it reaches its apotheosis in the duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan Mustafar. That was a moment that in fans' minds had been building up for 25 years. And it delivered. And the reason it delivered was partly because the choreography, partly because the talents of Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor, who practiced and worked hard to make that scene the most iconic fight it ever could be. Partly because Lucas knows how to direct a fight scene and a action scene, so you know what's going on. You can follow the action and the flow. Partly because the emotional stakes that we had built up to that point. But a big part is John Williams' music. He even brings back Duel of the Fates at one point to remind us of how we got here, and that this is a fight that has been building since that first movie. And so, I'm sure other people could put other things here. I could have just said, all right, no Star Wars, we're going to exclude that. But it's the elephant in the room. You can't have a list and not have Star Wars at number one. I'm sorry, those are the rules. I'm not in charge. Anyway, I'm sure that no one has any disagreements with my ranking. I'm sure there's no movie that I missed that you're going to put in the comments and say, hey, what about this movie? I thought that was great. Or what about this composer? So I'm not expecting a lot of comments on this video. But be sure to put in the comments what you thought, whether you thought I underrated something, whether you thought I overrated something, whether you thought there was a soundtrack I completely missed. Music is a personal thing. It appeals to something in our soul. I mean that literally. One of the things that we've seen is even people who are suffering from dementia, if you play music for them, they'll respond, they'll react, they'll sing along or dance to it or whatever. It appeals to something deep in us, and that is something very personal. So I don't expect everyone's list to be the same as mine. I would be very disappointed if your list was exactly the same as mine. All music is personal. All taste is personal. Everyone's taste is valid. Unless you're one of those people who thinks that Battlefield Earth had a good soundtrack. But we'll talk about that at some point. In any case, I'm recording this on Christmas Day, actually. And I'm hoping to get it out before the new year. It's going to take a lot of editing, but I have some time. This has been a difficult year for me personally, for reasons. If you follow me on the blog, you'll know what's going on. I'm not going to darken your day with that, but it's been a rough year, and I have when things get tough, it's family first, job second, YouTube a distant third. And so that's why I've been slacking off a little bit on the channel. But I'm hoping to get some more done now that things have stabilized a little bit. And I have several videos that are recorded. I just need to edit them and get them out. So hopefully we'll see some more content in the new year. In the meantime, I can't thank you enough for all the support you guys give me. And, if you want to continue to support, like, subscribe, recommend to friends, buy my book. People like it. And it's not too expensive and a good read, I think. It's gotten, people have given me very kind words on it. And so I'm hoping some more people read it, because books like being read, and I like being read. In the meantime, I'm Mike Siegel. I write for Ordinary Times. Thank you so much for watching.